17-year-old Gladys Arellano lived in Boyle Heights, Los Angeles in 1996. She was beautiful, intelligent, and had big dreams for her life. Gladys was last seen on January 28, 1996, leaving her home. When she failed to return home later in the day, she was reported missing by her family. 2 days later, her body was found off a main road in a ravine in Topanga Canyon. She had been assaulted and strangled. Serology evidence was collected from her body, and a DNA profile of the unknown offender was uploaded to the state and federal DNA databases, but a match could not be found. An extensive investigation was completed by the investigators at the time, but it led nowhere, and the case went cold. That was until 2019. Los Angeles police arrested a man by the name of Jose Luis Garcia for domestic assault. During the booking process, DNA swabs were taken from Garcia and processed. Investigators then realized that his DNA matched the DNA that was taken from Gladys's body. Detectives visited Garcia and questioned him about Gladys. The crime took place when he was just 19 years old. They obtained a second DNA swab from him. The Los Angeles Crime Lab was then able to confirm that Garcia's genetic profile matched the unidentified sample taken from Gladys's body in 1996. 43-year-old Jose Luis Garcia was arrested by U.S. Marshals on September 29, 2019, in Dallas, Texas. He was extradited on October 14 to Los Angeles County, where he was held on a $1 million bail. Detective Hugo Renaga said, "This case is typical of the type of cases that the unsolved detectives are faced with on a daily basis. We are gratified that we are successful in bringing this tragic case to a close." Renaga confirmed that investigators were looking into the possibility that Garcia was involved in other crimes as well. Gladys's niece and goddaughter, Samantha Moreno, spoke movingly of the need to remember her godmother, as well as all other women who were victims of violence. Recognizing her life is important. Beautiful Latina souls from Boyle Heights should never be forgotten, Moreno said. Acts of violence against women should never be forgotten. Samantha Moreno thanked the detectives who never lost sight of finding justice. Gladys Arellano's case was worked on by retired detectives Joe Purcell and Sean McCarthy, who both work part-time on the Sheriff's Department's Unsolved Case Unit. Thank you for not giving up on our Gladys, who was a loving daughter, sister, aunt, and godmother. Gladys was only 17 when her life was taken. She had a beautiful soul. She was beautiful, intelligent, gorgeous, and she had a radiant smile. She had such big dreams for her life. My grandparents would have been so proud of her. Moreno said she was grateful Garcia was off the streets after nearly a quarter century. "We want nothing more than for him to pay for his brutal crime," she said. "We recognize that this will not bring Gladys back, but we are relieved to know that there will be justice for Gladys. This is a victory that we acknowledge in her honor, and we look forward to more victories." Jose Luis Garcia was found guilty of all the charges against him on July 18, 2023. It was a day the loved ones of Gladys Arellano had been waiting decades for. "It is never enough for having taken a life of such a beautiful soul," said Elizabeth Arellano of her sister Gladys. Gladys Arellano's sister and best friend told the court what Garcia did nearly destroyed them, as they wondered for more than 25 years what happened to her. "It was tough, but it felt really good to finally get it off your chest and actually, like, seeing him and, releasing it. And having some kind of comfort," said Vanessa Arellano, Gladys Arellano's younger sister. Janet Ramirez, Gladys Arellano's close friend, said the plea deal gives her some comfort, but it is not enough. 19 years is never enough, but I have comfort knowing now she can rest, that the perpetrator is going to be behind bars, because for 25 years I've lived with the guilt of not knowing what I could have done different, Ramirez said. Jose Garcia was sentenced on August 15, 2023 to 18 years and 8 months in prison for taking Gladys's life. Garcia pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter, kidnapping, and domestic assault, according to the district attorney's office. He waived his credit for the just over 1,000 days he has spent in jail since his 2020 arrest. Retired Sheriff's Detective Joe Purcell handled the cold case investigation. The fact is that we can give justice to people and to society. It is really important not to let these cases go unresolved. We need to have people pay the debt they owe to society, he said. 23-year-old Laura Kempton lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire in 1981. She was a student at the Portsmouth Beauty School and was employed at the Macro Polo gift store and Karen's ice cream parlor. Laura was known to be an outgoing free spirit with a big personality and was particularly social. Laura was last seen entering her Chapel Street apartment alone during the early morning hours of September 28, 1981. A police officer attempting to serve a court summons related to unpaid parking tickets found Laura's body a few hours later. As the officer made his way up to the residence, he noticed a wooden panel piece on the front door was missing. Through the small opening, he could see Laura's body lying on the floor just inside the apartment. An autopsy showed that her life was taken shortly after entering her apartment. She suffered massive trauma to the left side of her head. Laura had incurred multiple skull fractures, as well as lacerations and contusions on her brain. She had also been assaulted, which meant DNA could be collected from her body. Investigators collected other evidentiary items from the crime scene as well and stored it to be used later. They interviewed other residents in Laura's apartment complex but gathered no useful information. The case sadly went cold. In 1986, investigators revealed that they questioned Ronald Spiewak about Laura's slaying. He took the lives of 2 other women in Boston, Massachusetts. Spiewak denied involvement, but Portsmouth police were purportedly monitoring his case. In taking a closer look at the crimes he was charged with, the only blatant association is that Ronald Spiewak hailed from a city in New Hampshire, roughly 45 minutes from Portsmouth, hardly a smoking gun. Spiewak had picked up his victims, Gina Quarnier and Kathleen McGuire, on 2 separate occasions in Boston. Though he eventually confessed to ending their lives, Spiewak contended that in both instances each of them had pulled a knife on him, demanding additional payment for their services. He claimed he only acted in self-defense. Spiewak strangled both women and dumped their bodies elsewhere. Gina's in an abandoned railway car in South Boston, and Kathleen's along the driveway of a tourist information booth on Interstate 95 in Kittery, Maine. No real ties to Laura's case were ever identified. In 1998, 2 Portsmouth detectives attending a conference in Florida listened intently as an investigator with the Naval Investigative Service presented the unprosecuted case of Dina Kitchler. Dina had been assaulted and strangled with a rope in her home in Mayport, Florida in December of 1990. Signs of an intense struggle and clumps of Dina's long, dark hair were present all over the house, a large portion having been cut off in her bathtub. Dina's husband, a naval officer, had been deployed at the time of the crime. Portsmouth Police Captain James Tucker could not believe what he was hearing. The similarity of Dina's case to the slaying of a New Hampshire woman, Michelle LaFond, was astonishing. And better yet, authorities had already arrested a man by the name of John Brewer in connection with Dina's case. Regrettably, he had been released from custody shortly after his arrest, as authorities lacked sufficient physical evidence. But as new details emerged in regards to the Dublin, New Hampshire case of Michelle LaFond, John Brewer found himself back in custody before long. Portsmouth investigators were able to pinpoint a definitive link between Brewer and Michelle LaFond. In searching through records, James Tucker located a job application that John Brewer had filled out, listing Michelle's husband, Gary, as a reference. Police matched DNA from hairs collected in the Kitchler case to DNA taken from a DNA sample in the LaFond case, and John Brewer was arraigned and charged for both cases. News of the indictment swept the Granite State, and it was reported that Brewer had been linked to 3 other cases, 2 in Portsmouth and 1 in Florida. It appeared that Brewer was living in New Hampshire at the time that Laura Kempton's life was ended, but his modus operandi proved perceptibly divergent. No real correlations were ever made. Perhaps it was just a hasty assumption due to the fact that the detectives who had brought Brewer to justice were from Portsmouth. Other rumors swirling among the small seacoast town pinned what happened to Laura on a couple of young men in the area known to be violent drug suppliers. Previously gracing the pages of the police logs with more minor offenses, members of the operation led by a Portsmouth local, Thomas Ferraggi, had escalated to far more intemperate crimes. Ferraggi in particular had been arrested for assaulting several women. Eventually, he was indicted in March of 1982 for fatally shooting 24-year-old Valerie Blair in the neighboring town of Rye. Blair was found in Audiorn State Park, having been shot 5 times in the head and face with a .22 caliber pistol. Thomas Ferraggi was incarcerated for decades but maintained his innocence. He blamed what happened to Valerie Blair on one of his cohorts, who he states must have stolen his firearm. In an interview, Ferraggi asserted he believed the same man took Laura Kempton's life. Ferraggi said that Laura was a customer of theirs, and his friend became upset when he saw her kissing someone in her apartment while they were there conducting a transaction. Interestingly, Ferraggi's girlfriend in 1982 was enrolled at the Portsmouth Beauty School, where Laura Kempton was enrolled as well. Ferraggi's DNA was collected, but he was never charged with any additional crimes. The man Thomas Ferraggi blamed for Laura's case was looked at by police and cleared. The next major update came on July 20th, 2023. It was then that investigators announced Laura's case was finally solved after 42 years. Investigators identified the man responsible as Ronnie James Lee, who was 21 at the time. Officials said Lee lived and worked in Portsmouth. Assistant Attorney General Rachel Harrington said, "There is no indication that he knew or was acquainted with Laura Kempton." Lee served in the U.S. Army until May 15, 1981, and then worked for MBI Security at Liberty Mutual in Portsmouth from June 1981 to August 1982. Lee used his mother's address on Rock Hill Avenue in Portsmouth when he was arrested by Portsmouth police on November 8, 1982 on an attempted theft charge. Lee's criminal history includes being linked to 4 residential burglaries and one commercial burglary in 1983, including 2 burglaries he pleaded guilty to. In 1987, Lee was convicted of charges stemming from a burglary in Keene, New Hampshire, that included the assault of a woman in that home. He was sentenced to prison, where he was held from December 1987 to July 1990. Lee lost his life on February 9, 2005, at the age of 45 after he overdosed. Officials with the Attorney General's office said if Lee were alive, he would face first-degree charges for knowingly ending Laura's life during the commission or attempted commission of aggravated felonious assault, and alternatively for striking her with a blunt object, which was believed to be a wine bottle. Investigators said they were able to identify Lee through genetic genealogy techniques. They said physical evidence collected from the scene in 1981 revealed, after forensic analysis done decades later, a male DNA profile. Beginning in 2022, officials said Portsmouth Police worked in conjunction with the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Laboratory, the Maine State Police Forensic Laboratory, the Attorney General's Cold Case Unit, and Genetic Genealogy Research Organization Identifiers International to conduct forensic genetic genealogy to identify the contributor of the DNA found at the crime scene as Lee. Because Lee is not alive anymore, the case is considered closed and solved. Laura's family released a statement about the case being solved. The Kempton family wishes to express our deepest gratitude to the Portsmouth Police Department for solving Laura's case. Their diligence and determination, along with extraordinary personal commitment of the past decades, have led to this moment for Laura. The family would like to acknowledge retired Captain John Paracci, Portsmouth Police Department Investigative Division, and his team members past and present who have worked tirelessly on Laura's case. Their extraordinary efforts have led to this important moment today. Many, many other hands have touched Laura's file over the past 41 years, and the family expresses our deepest gratitude to all who contributed. The Kempton family would like to request privacy at this time as we process this information. Thank you all. In the past, law enforcement officials have said Laura's case and the demise of Tammy Little in Portsmouth in 1982 were potentially connected. When asked about Tammy's case, Attorney General John Formella said it is still being investigated. The Little case remains under investigation, Formella said. It is our hope that what we are announcing today may give us some additional information about that case. It was Tuesday, October 19, 1982, and nobody had heard from Tammy Little over the course of a couple of days. The 20-year-old Portsmouth Beauty School student was last seen by friends who dropped her off at her home after a night out over the weekend. Though she lived alone, the sociable young woman would never intentionally make herself unreachable for such a long period of time. When she had not surfaced, it was clear that something was discernibly wrong. Tammy's mother was justifiably concerned. She decided to look in on her daughter at her Maplewood Avenue apartment. What she encountered that October day in 1982 was utterly scarring. Her child's lifeless body in her home, and she had been beaten ferociously. Authorities swarmed 315 Maplewood Avenue to process the case after Tammy's mother called them. Investigators collected physical evidence from the home and interviewed nearby neighbors. An autopsy was performed the following day, revealing that Tammy had succumbed to massive head injuries, having been viciously bludgeoned. In the coming days and months, as Tammy's family and friends mourned her monumental loss, the remainder of the city was left in a state of heightened distress. The fears of many residents had seemingly been confirmed, and an air of trepidation shrouded the community. It had happened again. Another girl, another crime, no arrest. The similarities between Laura and Tammy's cases are striking, but the two women share much more in common than the way in which their lives ended. Both Tammy and Laura lived alone in ground-level apartments in Portsmouth and attended the Portsmouth Beauty School. They had been aspiring models, having photographs taken in hopes of acquiring work. Both women were outgoing and frequented a couple of the same bars downtown, and they lost their lives in the early morning hours of a weekend day in the fall. They lived just a mile from one another. The hope is that DNA will soon reveal whether Ronnie James Lee is responsible for taking Tammy Little's life as well. 23-year-old Sherald Monique Taylor lived in Weldon, North Carolina in 2002. She was married to high school sweetheart John Osby. They had a 7-year-old daughter named Justice. Justice woke up on the morning of August 16, 2002, and realized that Sherald had not waken her up in time for the school bus, and she missed it. Justice went to her mom's bedroom, and it was there that she discovered that someone had taken Sherald's life. An autopsy showed that she had been strangled and presumably assaulted. It was not made public if there were signs of forced entry, or if investigators were able to collect forensic evidence from the crime scene that belonged to the perpetrator. Despite an extensive investigation by authorities, no arrests were made and the case went cold. Justice and John grieved together for 17 more years. Then came December 2019. After going missing, John Osby was found fatally shot and rolled up in a blanket near Sycamore Street in Weldon. Investigators were unable to track down the person that shot him, and for years the family was left wondering if they would ever get answers to what happened to John and Sherald Taylor. That changed when Sheriff Tyree Davis hired Detective Sergeant Samoji as Halifax County's dedicated cold case investigator in January 2023. His job was to pore over the office's unsolved cold cases, looking for anything that investigators may have missed in the past, and using new technology to find clues that were out of reach before. Detective Samoji first looked into John Osby's case, before realizing Sherald's life had been taken by someone years earlier. He identified the person responsible for what happened to Sherald. Finally, on July 21, 2023, 46-year-old Lewis Turner Jr. was arrested and charged with taking Sherald Taylor's life. He was living in Northampton County, North Carolina. It is not known yet if he is responsible for shooting John Osby. It was revealed that Turner was a friend of Sherald and her family back in 2002 when he took her life. Turner was 25 years old when the crime took place. He has 2 other criminal charges on his record, assaults from when he was a teen. In both those cases, he got probation. After being arrested and charged with voluntary manslaughter, Turner was held at the Halifax County Jail under $250,000 bond. Scott Hall, patrol captain of the Halifax County Sheriff's Office, outlined the reasoning behind the voluntary manslaughter charge. This was not a premeditated crime with malice. Based on the facts of the case and elements of the crime, we charged accordingly. Sheriff Tyree Davis remarked how he cried tears of joy at being able to arrest a suspect in connection with Sherald's case. I received the call that we were able to solve one of our cold cases, a cold case from over 20 years ago. No one knew about this information, and we could not say anything until we notified the family first. However, I was instantly overcome with emotion and tears started to flow. As a member of the State Commission, I was sitting up front with the other board members and I tried to hold things together. I did so just by wiping the tears away, but once I started sniffling, I knew I needed to leave the room. Folks, I can tell you that these tears were tears of joy. These were tears of excitement. Excitement not only for Ms. Taylor's family, but also excitement for her friends, co-workers, schoolmates, and anyone that she has ever crossed paths with. I was excited for the community because this is a beacon of hope for all those families that need closure too, he added. Sherald's daughter, Justice Osby, had this to say after the arrest. Unbelievable, unbelievable. We never knew this day was coming. Justice said she is grateful to everyone who helped bring Turner to justice, and she is glad that she can finally have some closure. She said, "I am just so thankful for everyone that participated and helped me get closure for my family, because today is a good day." On August 13, 2014, a 13-year-old girl in Charlotte, North Carolina, told police that she had been assaulted by an unknown man. The incident took place along Shamrock Drive near Eastway Drive. She was taken to a nearby hospital where evidence of an assault was collected. Repeatedly throughout the years, investigators would try and match the DNA of the perpetrator to a DNA profile they have in their databases. Recently, investigators with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department identified 33-year-old Travon Levi Woods as the man responsible for assaulting the 13-year-old girl. The identification was made by matching DNA in the combined DNA index system. Woods was arrested for this crime on October 27, 2023. On the exact date of his arrest, Woods was leaving the Alexander Correctional Institute in Taylorsville after completing his sentence for unrelated charges. Police said they took Woods to the Mecklenburg County Detention Center and served him with his new warrants. A trial date has not been determined yet.